You don't tell stories where you're the hero. You tell stories where you learn the big lesson. Our children take attendance at their events. You're either there or you're not. If you saw like Pitch Perfect, that was us, but we all had jobs. I had a guy who was PhD in biochemistry, another guy was a sales guy. So by day, I was PR director at Children's Hospital, and by night we'd play Rockstar and do like a 3-hour show a cappella. So it was super fun. My real struggle is just recognizing my limitations. And I just can't say yes to everything, even if I want to say yes to everything. I want to spend my life doing things that matter with people who care.
Hello and welcome back once again to Hard Knocks. This time we're speaking with David Avrin, a man who got his start as an a cappella singer before ending up as a worldwide speaker in over 20 different countries, teaching companies the importance and how to build amazing customer experiences. We unpack all of the hard knocks and wisdom he learned along the way, of which my personal favorite is how are you going to live the dash between the two dates on your tombstone? So, David, I have to ask you, so many people have moments in their life they wish they could go back to via a time traveling machine. Either because it was a really fun moment, they just like to witness again, it was a mistake they made, or it was just such a big moment, something happened that changed them, and they're just really curious to see what would happen if I didn't do that, if I didn't take that job, or if that accident hadn't happened. There's so many different things that could happen. And I'm really curious to know for you, if I gave you a time travel machine and said right outside there is a machine right now, where would you go back to? What moment would that be?
It's a great question. And as I think back to sort of the trajectory of my life, and part of this was conversations that I had with my father, who would say in later years that he was convinced when I was young, like 12, 13, that by the time I was 16 years old, I would be on every drug. I would be, and I laughed. I said, why would you think that? He says, because you were this, this bigger than life kid. And I'm the second oldest of 6. And he says, you just knew how to push everybody's buttons. And you were the, like, I think they wrote a book in the years back called Personality Plus. I'm probably still that guy to an extent, but he says, you were almost feral. He says, you were just this kid. He says that you couldn't keep still in class. They were wondering if it was ADD. Now, of course, they call it ADHD.
Yep.
And the pivotal moment for me was in 10th grade, and I auditioned for a school play. And that so changed the trajectory of my life in that I had this outlet to perform. And this love of being on stage, which I carry today at 61 years old.
Right.
I've spent my life on stage. And it's like, I think some people, like the people going like into comedy, some people just because they're funny, and some people are looking for, affirmation. Some people go in school and run for student council because they're true leaders, and other people just want to be included.
Okay.
I was just one of those guys that I didn't need applause. I still don't need applause. That just was I'm a sharer. And I loved being on stage, and I did plays and I did musicals, and all the way to the extent where I went to college on a full ride theater scholarship.
Wow.
And so I was,
so cool.
And so it was funny because my father was a rocket scientist, like a true pragmatic
engineer.
Okay.
And we were so different in personalities, and he loved me. We had a great relationship. But years later, I actually dedicated one of my books to my father, and it was right after he had passed away. And I wrote in there in the dedication to my father, Philip Avrin, a true rocket scientist who never really understood what I did for a living, but he loved me anyway. And so to go back to your question, that pivotal moment for me was the outlet, was channeling that energy, channeling that extrovert, which I am to the core. And I just loved to perform. I didn't have self-esteem issues where I needed affirmation or applause. I just loved it. And then I went to college on this scholarship. And what was interesting was it was kind of a different dynamic. And not to make any judgments, but I was like the only straight guy in the entire department, as
Yeah,
they say.
yeah,
Not that
sure.
there's anything wrong with that, right?
Right.
But it was kind of interesting. So it was my ticket to college, but I also realized after a couple years, I started thinking, I think I'm on a different trajectory than a lot of these other people.
Yeah.
I was the only one who has really had to think. I mean, generally the only one who, like, I have to support a wife and kids someday.
Mhm.
And I don't think I can do that by doing community theater in God's Wrath, Iowa, when I'm 60 years old. And so,
That is a
I go
real
watch-
city.
yeah, it probably is a real place.
I go
Right,
watch that play.
Right,
And
right.
so I had so much fun doing it, but I realized I got to get serious and get a job. So I ended up, other long story short, changing my major to broadcast journalism, because when you have a voice like mine, people are like, you should talk on the radio.
Exactly.
And so
Right.
I had this epiphany crisis, whatever it was, and I gave up my scholarship and I changed my major. And that was the second moment that changed the trajectory of my life. But I think going back to
You
your
gave
original,
up your scholarship.
I gave up the scholarship.
Wow.
But I'll tell you honestly, it was probably, as I think back and maybe my own revisionist history in my brain, it was probably a mutual decision.
Okay.
You know, I think they were realizing I wasn't all in. As the big scholarship winner that they had at the University of Northern Colorado,
Right.
they also expected your life and your time and
Sure.
everything else. And there was a lot of things I wanted to do, and I did
Right.
intramural sports and all those things.
Yeah.
So the day when I decided to do that, I actually drove over to the top 40 radio station. I was just driving around my car going, what am I going to do? And I pulled in and I said, can I speak to your program director? And she said, sure. Can I tell him who's here? I said, tell him it's David Avrin. She goes, okay. And I walked into his office, sat down at 20 years old. And I said, so tell me about radio. And I walked out with a job.
I
And
love
then
it.
and then I walked over and quit my scholarship, changed my major, and stood in a 2-hour line of financial aid to try and think, how am I going to do this now?
Wow.
So, but I love the
Love it.
question because I think we can look back, especially as we get older, at some of those pivotal moments where things did change for us, and it wasn't always because of a crisis.
Yeah.
It might be because of an epiphany, or a catalyst or something. But I started thinking, what would my life be if I didn't have an outlet to channel that creative energy?
Right,
And so
yeah.
that was a really good. And then even as an adult, I sang in an a cappella group for years, and so I've always been on stage. And now as a professional speaker and consultant, I'm still leading from the front of the room. So it's kind of interesting in different methodologies for communicating and sharing,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
always sort of in the front of the room.
So I've got to go all the way back to 10th grade when you made that decision that, okay, I'm going to audition. I'm going to go into theater, right? I'm going to take a stab at this. What changed in your head? What was that moment where you felt like I should do it? You felt comfortable enough to go out of your comfort zone to go pursue this? I mean,
Yeah.
because you hadn't done it previously. So what do you think changed?
But what's interesting is I don't know that I was out of my comfort zone. I think it was more of a recognition that here's an opportunity to do something that really looks fun. And it was probably in conversation with friends.
Sure.
Are you going to, I'm going to do that. That sounds good. Let's do the fun. But in my mind, it wasn't like Broadway. It was like, who doesn't want to be a movie star
Right.
or
Yeah.
something like that? And you think as young men, how many things did we do that ultimately was about getting girls, right? Every guy who picks up a guitar, it's like,
Right, you think about it.
right,
Sure.
because it's for chicks, right? They'll
Yeah.
like this kind of stuff.
Right.
And so I was 16 years old, and I remember I joined the ski club because a girl I liked was in, and sat next to her on the bus, whatever. But what's interesting is it wasn't out of my comfort zone. It was, I think I found a home that was really exciting for me. So that was one of those things that was, it wasn't really stepping out. I mean, certainly other things in my life
Yeah.
and for all of us,
Right.
but that was one where I think I kind of found my tribe,
Yeah.
which was the theater kids.
Yeah.
So
you know.
yeah, in your family, how many children were
I'm the second oldest of 6.
of 6?
So 3 biological brothers, and then I
Okay.
have a stepbrother
All right.
and 2 adopted sisters.
Okay.
Wow.
And
So I'm the second oldest.
how many followed the more traditional path? Your father was an engineer, so I
Yeah.
would imagine I'm an engineer too. So you kind of look at your children to follow that path.
Yeah.
My wife's father was an engineer as well. So definitely that. I can't imagine that there was no conversation like, wait a minute,
Oh,
what
yeah.
are you doing? I want to hear about that.
100%. You know,
Yeah.
what was interesting though, because I am very fortunate that I had very loving parents. My mom was crazy, like think Liza Minnelli with an extra 40 pounds of no filter. That was my mom. So the
Okay.
creative side clearly came. I mean, she
Right.
was, if she could have any dream, she would have had the Von Trapp family singers, but nobody else in the family could sing. But like she wanted us to be the Osmonds, she wanted us to be, and everybody's
Right.
like, not going to happen, mom.
Right. You could have been Donnie.
Right, right. My father was the pragmatist. So even though he would absolutely supported anything, but he would always throw in the caveat,
Yeah.
have something to fall back on.
Right.
So even in college with the a theater major, which I was for the first couple of years, he was supportive of that.
Right.
Certainly helped financially, but he's like, "What are you falling back on?"
Yeah.
And so I've always had that voice in my head of that pragmatic, and I'm kind of that balance between my mom and my dad. And one of the things, John, that you had said about my other siblings, we're all very different things, but all very sort of successful kinds of careers. And my family was Jewish, and so in the Jewish tradition, um, and this is going to sound unrelated, but it's not. There's the old conversation that we always have in any religious community. Where does life begin?
Right.
Right? Is it at conception? Is it at birth? In the Jewish tradition, you're considered a viable life form when you graduate from medical school. So so there's a pressure.
You forgot law school though.
Yeah, but that's second tier. My son, he's a doctor, such a good boy, right? But it's true, and it's true in some of the Asian communities as well. But in the Jewish community, that expectation of education, that
Right.
expectation of success. So I have an older brother who is who's an attorney.
There we go.
I have another brother who's been in commercial insurance for most of his years. I have another brother who is the 6-time AP Sports Writer of the Year for the whole planet. I have a sister who's been in restaurant management. So I mean, just there is this expectation: do whatever you love. We love you. Get your education
Right.
and get a good job. And so everybody has their own path, but we're all close, and my siblings are hilarious. And we had very raucous Thanksgiving dinners, and
bet.
any family dinner growing up. It's just the volume was off the charts. So very ethnic kind of
Oh yeah.
Eastern
Was that here in
European.
Denver? You grew
Yeah,
up?
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and now some are sort of scattered and in different places, but
So your older brother was the attorney.
yes,
Yeah. See, he filled the box.
Yeah.
Yeah. He checked that
we
box. So,
we
yeah.
took the pressure
Yeah.
off.
Exactly. That's what happened there.
Well, that's what it was when my nephew, who is now like 30 years old, when is my older brother's son. So when my son was born, he was thrilled that the pressure was off. He wasn't the only golden child who
Right.
you better be a surgeon or
Right.
something
Oh, I
else.
love that.
So yeah, high expectations, but also just incredibly loving, ethnic kind of a
Absolutely.
background.
Oh, I love
Yeah.
that. I'm already thinking about the food.
Oh yeah, food was everything,
Yeah.
and if you didn't eat, it was an insult.
Yeah.
What was I have to ask,
Mhm.
what was probably the most like you close your eyes and you're thinking about like that meal? What was that food that you would eat all the time? You're like, man, that is my comfort food because I had so much as a kid.
Yeah, well, there's some of those ethnic kinds of things
Yeah.
as well, like the lox and bagels, whatever. But we have this thing that's called a kugel, and a kugel is essentially it's just a noodle dish. So there's a sweet kugel and there's a cheesy kugel. And cheesy kugel. So we would have people over and say, "Oh, my kids are nuts. Like at Thanksgiving, we always have a kugel." And other people go, "Oh, you've been talking about this forever." And they go, "Oh, it's mac and cheese." And we're all like, "No, it's kugel." And they said, "Yeah, but it's just kind of mac and cheese." Well, like, okay, maybe it is, but no, it's kugel. And then we'd make noodles and cheese. And then my mom would put cornflakes over the top. So
Yes.
the crunchy part.
Oh, yeah.
So it's
The texture.
very working class,
Love
low
it.
end, but it still makes me smile. But yeah, it's mac and cheese.
Oh,
Love
that's
that.
so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
I would have enjoyed having dinner there. That would
Yeah,
have been fun.
but the best part is, and as you know, and your family, the two of you, is just family,
Yeah.
and just I mean, God forbid somebody makes it to the Thanksgiving table or the dinner table with a zit on their nose.
Oh.
It's on, it's relentless. God forbid somebody in high school shows up, one of the boys with an earring to
Right.
be cool. Oh yeah, it's on. It's merciless, kinds of things. So we always had to prep the boyfriends and girlfriends for my brothers and sisters and I before they came and joined us for dinner. It's like
Sure.
we had to sort of prepare them that this isn't the quiet clanking of the it's raucous, lots of conversation. So you see, I smile recalling some of these things too. And then of course, as we get older, we get to decide what traditions that we're going to pass along,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
What are we going to leave behind, and what are things we want to pass along to our families?
Yeah. Yeah. What were some of the traditions you decide I need to keep this, and what were the ones you're like, maybe not that one?
They're not all traditions. There's certain things, and it's a different mindset, and physical punishment, was part of the deal. There was never a thought in my mind that I was going to start reaching for my belt when my kids misbehaved. And so I made a conscious decision. I'm not going to pass that part on. Didn't mean I didn't want to throttle my kids from time to time, but
Right.
but yeah, those kinds of things that I thought we're not going to do that. And then just being intentional about special time with the kids. That makes sense. Like, because I'm the second oldest of six, which is kind of interesting. Between my wife and I, we have five. I could count on one hand the amount of times I got to do something with just me and my dad. And so, and part of it is because we went through a divorce when I was young as well. And so I made a decision early, especially because I traveled a bit for work and my speaking, is that for my three kids as they grew up, from the time that they were 8 on, I told them each year they could all look at my calendar and the place and they could choose a special daddy trip.
Oh, it's so
That
cool.
without their stupid brothers and sisters, that we would just be us. So every year from when my kids were 8 till 18 or 19 when they left, we did a special trip. So I would go speak for an hour in Washington, D.C. or something. And then we would do 3 days of Smithsonian and all those kind of things, and order room service and pillow fights on the bed and all those kinds of things as well. And so, like, my daughters really wanted to go to Broadway shows, which is great because I love Broadway as well.
Right.
And so my son would want to go to Disney or something like that. But they're all in their 20s, 21 to 30 right now. But they all think back and they can remember at least 10 individual special time where they got my undivided attention.
That's so cool.
That's an amazing idea.
And they were just as great memories for me.
Yeah.
And so,
Did you pass along the plan? Like, did they have to do some of the planning? Like, they're like, hey, we're going to go do this, etc. So that they get to make whatever they want out of it.
yeah, absolutely. The logistics, of course, I took care of all
Man,
of
we
that.
should have done that.
Yeah. I know. We should have.
But
Didn't
here's
know
the-
him then.
But here's the thing: is you still can. So a couple years ago, my son, who's almost 22, he said to me, he says, "Do I still get to do the dad trip?" And I said, "Do you still want to?" And he says, "Yeah." So where do we? So we and I didn't have a gig, but I just had points and stuff. And so he and I went to London and did the tour, the Tower of London, and all this stuff. He
fun.
wanted to do that. And then we took the train up to Edinburgh in Scotland, and we did the Edinburgh Castle and all that stuff. It was just me and my 19-year-old son, or maybe he was 20, I think 19. And so I'm still looking for those opportunities. He's still saying that, like, Dad, next time you go to, whatever, Europe, take me. I'm like, no, I'm taking my wife.
Yeah.
Thanks though.
Right.
But yeah, I still try and do, because that's the nice thing about my business is that I travel internationally.
Right.
I get to go on some amazing trips.
Yeah.
And all I have to do is pick up there, my flight and my hotel are paid for.
Right.
And so maybe it's extending it or picking up there. So I had a presentation years ago in Barcelona. And so I took my younger two, because it was spring break time, and all I do is use points, and I picked and so they got to go with me. And what they didn't know was that I was secretly flying in their older sister, who was at college. And so we all met up in Barcelona. I spoke for an hour, and the rest of the time we just laughed and saw things that, I don't know how you grew up. I didn't get to do those things growing up.
Yeah.
We would take a van to Mexico during college to drink Coronas. That was like my international experience.
Right.
But it's a those are the kind of traditions that I hope that they say, I want to do special daddy or mommy time with my kids
I love
as well,
that.
and
Totally.
be really intentional about that.
What
Yeah.
gave you the idea? I mean, that's ingenious.
Oh, I don't know that it was
You don't get to
started
say it
off.
just happened. I mean,
Well, it happened probably because I was able to take one of my kids,
Yeah.
and then I realized how great it was.
yeah.
And then probably one of the other two were like, "Whoa, what about me? Why do I
Yeah,
get
yeah,
it?
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
we'll do our trip too." And then I just realized I was going to really prioritize.
That's cool.
But it all really came from that place of the one-on-one time,
Yeah.
because for us, yeah, we're going to do this as a family, and it's rarely as fun as we think it is, because who's having a meltdown or who needs diapers changed or whatever else.
Yeah.
But I really crave that as well, and I realized
Yeah.
that I didn't have that growing up.
Right.
I did not have that.
Yeah.
And so it grew into, I want to do this all the time,
That's awesome.
every year.
Yeah, that's really special. I
Yeah.
love your creative energy about that. The closest thing I ever heard was about Andy Grove and how he was raising his two girls. And he would go out with them once a month and they had to do their own OKRs. I'm serious. If you knew Andy Grove
No,
of Intel.
no, tell me about that. Oh, from Intel.
Yeah. So he was one of the founders of Intel.
Right.
And he was all about OKRs. He literally
OKR is what? Sorry.
That's objectives, key results.
Oh,
Right?
okay.
Right. So it's all about I'm going to measure and I'm going to perform. Right. So the whole company, literally invented OKRs. And so that he carried that through to his kids, as far as I understand.
Yeah.
And you can imagine little, whatever 10-year-olds, here's my key results for the quarter, right?
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
But as far as I understand it, it was very special time for them because over the years, I'm sure they looked back and said, Dad, you're a complete idiot on these things, but you kept us. I think it was more of the time that was, you have this executive that's very high powered, traveling all the time, right? And yet he made time for them every month to go
Yeah.
out to wherever it was, McDonald's or a meal. I mean, I don't know. He
Nice.
was very private about what he did with his children,
Yeah.
obviously. Yeah.
But stuff like that, like date night, like I with
Absolutely.
all my father-daughter dances and things like
Yeah.
that, way more fun for me. I mean, for them at the time, but we also realize that a lot of times the things happen when they were little kids, they have very few memories of.
Right.
But
That's
we
so true.
have cherished. My mom passed along to me. She's passed away about 11 years ago. But she passed along this one quote once
Yeah.
when she was figuring out email or something, and it said, "There are times when we would give everything we owned to have our grown children little for just a day,"
Oh,
and that gets me choked
wow.
up. Gets me choked up because that precious time. But every phase is amazing in different ways. I mean, you got to be proud of your son when you realize
Absolutely.
the man that he has become. But at one point, you were a little kid.
Yeah.
And you were
Yes.
this squishy little kid, and he was blowing on your belly and making you giggle,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or playing, my earliest memory, I think, is playing catch in the backyard. And I threw a ball and I hit my dad in the nuts. I remember that.
And-
That I
And
distinctly
you will
remember.
remember that forever.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're like, oh my God, what did I do?
I've
That
forgotten
stuff's
that.
fun.
But
No, I remember that. That was great. Yeah, I was
That
like,
stuff's
oh,
fun.
whoa. I didn't know that could happen.
But the other things that during the trips and that my kids still talk about today, which was really great, is I always want to sort of model the kinds of behavior as well as about how we treat people.
right.
And so when we would travel, there's no shortage of people that serve us when we travel.
Yep.
And so one of the things I taught my kids early on was that you talk to everyone and talk to people who serve. They, of course, were embarrassed that we do, but it's like when you walk down the hall, and I would verbalize this to them, when you walk down the hall in the hotel and you pass that housekeeper
Right.
who's on the card, these are people who work by themselves all day while we're at the beach, they're cleaning our toilets.
Yeah.
And while we're at the amusement park, they're vacuuming our rooms. And so to this day, and they still talk about it, and they're in the mid-20s, that they say hi and good morning to everybody, because then the response back is like they don't expect it, but
Yep.
then it gives you that great warm feeling. And so, whether it's talking to cab drivers or Uber drivers or getting conversations, at first I'm like really embarrassing them. Like, Dad, do you have to talk to everybody? I'm like, I do.
Uh-huh. I
I do
understand that.
because it's really important.
I've
So,
got to. All right, so I have to ask your opinion on that because we were talking just yesterday about how it's really uncommon nowadays for a lot of people even just to say hello to each other. Like you're in an apartment complex or just taking a walk, etc. People just, by and large, there's some good communities,
yeah,
but by and large, people just don't.
right.
Why do you think that is?
Because it's putting yourself out there.
Mm.
I think maybe from a pop psychology perspective, you might say we've lost the ability to communicate because we're texting, whatever. I don't know that that's really true.
Yeah.
I think it's learned behavior. I mean, you go to New York, and you people aren't saying hi to each other; they're just busy, right? But you go to Oklahoma City, and everybody's saying hi.
Yeah.
The thing, my kids. So all of my kids did a semester abroad in college in Europe, and they all came back, and they laughed and they said, "Dad, nobody says hi to each other like you do." It's just I learned in the first week to stop doing it because they just stare at you. And I said, but it's okay if they just stare at you. Uh, It's okay. You can still say hi to people,
Right.
and if they say hi back. But it's a great question. I think it's very regional. I think it's sort of the communities, but I find even as I get the older I get, the more I do it, the more I want to show grace. The more instead of saying thank you, I say I appreciate you. And I don't know where I heard that, but I started doing it all the time. And so now it's the same thing. I get off the phone. I was on the phone with somebody this morning, who was trying to help me with my kid was reviewing a contract, and I was talking to my prepaid legal whatever.
Yeah.
And at the very end I said, all right, great, thanks, I appreciate you. And the response is because not enough people do it. It's like,
Yep.
here's a weird analogy.
Yep.
It's handwritten thank you notes,
Yes.
right? They're so appreciated because they're not the norm,
Mhm.
right? There was a time when your parents, you will write those thank you
Exactly.
notes, whatever, right?
Right.
And now they're so appreciated. And so those are the kind of lessons that I wanted to sort of teach my kids, is those kind of things you go out of your way, and you do the right thing.
So some of that's cultural, but I wonder how much of that was you mentioned that you were raised Jewish.
Yeah.
My Jewish friends all have a very different, much more in-depth feeling for other people.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's something you would speak to, but that's
Yeah.
just my observation
Yeah.
that there is a lot more going on. Maybe it's through Hebrew class or something. I don't know what it
Yeah,
is. I'm
and I'll
fascinated.
I'll admit the fact of not being, I was never very religious growing up, but very culturally.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe it's more of a function of an Eastern European kind of a
Okay.
thing,
Yeah.
or a Mediterranean, whether you think sort of My Big Fat Greek Wedding,
Yeah.
that, this big lively families, whether it's Italian or my family was from Ukraine,
Right.
that sort of Eastern European, it's not hugs, it's bear hugs.
Right.
It's not touching their face, it's grabbing their cheeks and
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, it's just what I grew up with. And so,
I mean, there's
and
an acceptance that's quite amazing, honestly.
yeah, and it's a very heartfelt. My dad was this burly. I used to tell him he always my dad looked like a caveman rabbi. He was
Okay, I can picture that perfect.
he was a furry, hairy man, but just a heart of gold, and
Yeah.
so that kind of stuff. But by contrast, my first wife um, was a very German family,
Okay.
and they talked. And I'm not saying anything negative. It's just sort of the dynamic. They didn't really talk about issues to each other, but they talked to issues about each other to their siblings or to their mom. And it's that joke I saw once. A comedian was saying that there's the families where you have to say a disease and whisper. Like, I understand that Joan has cancer,
Okay.
right?
Right.
You know,
Sure.
But a lot of quiet at the dinner table, and kids are to be seen and not heard. And it was very difficult because my mother-in-law, who was very religious, very a little pious, kind of
Okay.
very German,
Uh-huh.
and my kids were feral. So my middle daughter
They
was,
take after you.
oh
from what
my
you're-
gosh,
Right,
and that's
right, right.
and that's what my dad, my stepmom used to say all the time. But my middle daughter, she was like anything she could grab, a hairbrush, a fork, became a microphone, and she's singing at the top of her lungs, and
Sure.
she's running around. That was very difficult for my in-laws because and in their mind, we're not
Right.
disciplining enough. And I'm like,
Sure.
she's
Yeah,
hilarious,
that's
right?
great.
So, but anyway, that observation,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's indicative of certain ethnic communities or like
Right.
that. Mexican, Hispanic families, very family,
Yep, very
right?
much so.
As well. And then very big extended families,
Right.
Hawaiian families. It's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's like how many generations are together. So,
Yeah.
I love that every part of it. And
So cool.
but I'm also much more extroverted
Yeah.
than my siblings. I think they are to an extent, but we're all who we are.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about, where did you pick up this thing about treating other people? You'd mentioned about the whether it's wait staff, or you mentioned people working in hotels. That's that's a really golden idea in how you want to raise your children.
Yeah.
But was that again something from your family, or is that something that was just, your heart was for other people that maybe were at a different economic level than you, or something like that?
Um, that's a really great question. I don't know. It's hard to say. I'm such a great guy, so it's just where my heart is,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I want to be a good person.
Right.
Um, but there was also stuff that came from my family, and I'll give you a really tough story. And this is one of the things that we've learned as speakers or authors is that stories have characters, stories have lessons, and they have heroes, and it's never you.
Right.
And I
Mhm.
learned that early on. You don't tell stories where you're the hero. You tell stories where you learn the big lesson. And so, and I have this in one of my early books. I wrote the Savvy Dad book, but one of the most profound lessons of my life is I was 12 years old, and one of my best friends was this black guy. I don't recall African American or whatever else, but he was a black kid. I was a
Yeah.
white kid,
Yeah.
and one of my best friends. And today he's a Denver cop, but like, dude, like seriously, like one of my best friends in the world. And we were playing a whole bunch of us playing football outside or something, and I got mad at something and started wearing my this deep, stupid 12-year-old thing. I pulled out the N word, and I don't remember what it was. I don't even remember the circumstance other than um, somehow my father found out. And I think my older brother told him or something else.
Of course, your
But
older
I
brother
have,
would.
right, of course. But the rage
Mm.
in my father. So my father grew up as this Jewish kid in East LA. And so he had his nose broken 7 times before he was 15 years old. The Mexican gangs, he was a Christ killer. And it's just what happened in those communities. And so he was bullied in such a severe way. And the fact that he came out of that and he made this conscious decision that his children will not be prejudiced and we will not put up with that in our family. To the extent when my father found out what I had said, I don't even know if I'd remembered that I had said it, but I was stupid. I was 12 years old.
Yeah.
He comes busting into my room, and I was listening to music or something. And he came in and he screamed, "Did you say this?" or whatever else. He grabbed me by the back of the collar and he dragged me up the sidewalk to this kid's house. His name is Eric. And he knocked on the door, and I'm like scared to death. And he's holding, and he asked their entire family to come out on the porch. So he had 3 siblings and his mom and his dad. He asked them all to come on, and he made me stand in front of each one of them and
Gosh.
apologize for what I had said, and then move down to the next one and apologize for what I had said. And when I was done, he smacked me all the way back home and grounded me for 6 weeks. And in no uncertain way, he said to me, "This is not what we believe. This will not be tolerated." And I remember thinking to myself years later that if I ever had encountered such a scenario with my kids, that I would hope that I would have the courage
Yeah.
to be as resolute as he was. Because he said to me in no uncertain terms,
Yeah.
"This is not who we are, and this is not what we believe."
Yeah.
And so I have to give some credit to my parents, that some of this, we treat everybody well,
Yeah.
and it's not trying to be magnanimous; it's just being human.
Yeah.
But part is I had this thing on my wall early on in my career, and it said the measure of a man is what he would do if he knew he would never be found out. So it's not about not being caught or anything else. It's that um, you do the right thing because it's the right thing.
Right.
And I'll give you another quick example. So, like a year ago, my son came home. He was home for summer from the college, and he'd gone bowling with his friends. And he came home with bowling shoes. I'm like, dude, what are you doing with that? He says, oh yeah, I forgot to whatever. I said, that's not okay. He said, Dad, don't make such a big deal. I said, it's not okay. They're not yours.
Right.
He said, there's bowling shoes. I said, you're going to take them back. He says, I will. And so it ended up being like 2 weeks, and they were still there. And I told him, I said, you don't sleep here tonight. Dad, why are you making such a big deal? I told you I'm going to bring them back. I said, you go bring them back.
Right.
For one reason, it's not yours. And it doesn't matter if they're a big company. There's a principle.
Yeah.
So he took it back. And that's just the kind of stuff that I hope that it resonates.
Sure.
Because I'm not going to be around forever.
Yeah.
And those are, there's a guy named Noah Ben Shia. He wrote a book called Jacob the Baker. He's sort of this prophet kind of a guy. And he had this saying that was on 40 million Starbucks cups. And this one, I love this one. And it said, do not hug your children so they will hug you back. Hug your children so that they will hug their children and their children's children. Good. I get choked up because I think that kind of legacy is really important. It's how we, it's that old line that says, my dad didn't tell me how to live. He just lived and let me watch it. That's not true. My dad definitely told me how to live, but the sentiment stands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really love that. I mean, one thing that comes up so often in, every church my dad and I have been a part of for a long time too. I mean, there's this big thing that, across, any different religion or culture is this thing of there's so many families that don't have family values. That if you were to go into a family and open a door, and I know people have been asked this, like, okay, great, what are the 5 things that your family stands for? What are they in order? Like, what are they? And that a lot of people just don't have an answer for that. And I love that from day one, and before you even had a family, your own family, obviously,
Yeah.
you're like, I know exactly what they are, and we're going to live by these. And that's so important.
I love that. It was interesting when I got married. My now ex-wife, we're all good friends. She had been married before, so my oldest daughter is actually from her first marriage, but we've been together since she'd been 8 months old. We sat down, and I was probably 30 or early 30s, and when we were talking about getting married, we had been together. We truly had a great relationship, but she said, we're going to talk about the hard things because I'm not going to go through this again. And I have a daughter. And so we laughed that we were very adult about this. And we went to a Village Inn, and we both came with a pad and piece of paper and said, we're not going to be like when you get married in your early 20s because, people in early 20s get married for 2 reasons. They're having really good sex, and they can't imagine not being with the other person. It has nothing to do with how are you going to handle money and who loads the dishwasher and everything else. And so we weren't kids. And so we sat down and we said, we're going to talk about money and religion and discipline and how are we going to do those things. And so, David, I think as you were saying, we were very intentional. Like, what are the things that we want to, what can we agree on? What can we compromise? And what are the people that we want to send into the world? I love that line that says, as parents, we're not raising children, we're raising adults. Right? Our job is to prepare them to be loving, productive, healthy, contributing people. And so I'm proud to say that I think we did that.
That's awesome.
One of my favorite pastors, he said, something you don't know about my wife. He says that my wife has been married to 5 different men.
And it's all him?
And it's all him.
I love that. I knew where you were going with that. Right.
And he said, that's important for us all to remember that we change every so often. And so finding a mate when you're younger, you have to have those adult conversations to recognize that people do change. We all change. And you have to fall in love over and over and over again with a different person.
Yeah. And some of us have people who change into different people multiple times a day. So I just call my wife. Occasionally I call her my sister wives. But all those people are really awesome. So that's a good part.
Right.
That's a
I
good
love
thing.
that. I love that. That's sweet.
So I've got to take a little bit of a pivot here.
Sure.
And I just want to learn what was the moment. So you got into theater.
Yeah.
That gave you a Fulbright scholarships, and you're like, okay, now I'm gonna do broadcast journalism. And what was the pivotal moment where all of a sudden you're like, I gotta be like a speaker here? Because I know you had worked a couple other different jobs.
Yeah.
Like you had been a media relations director for a children's hospital for like 4 years too.
Yeah.
But what was that moment where in your head, because it probably happened before you actually did it, of like,
Right.
this is what I want to do. I want to
Yeah.
be on stage. I want to be helping to educate people, tell people.
I want to
share
live
these-
out of a suitcase.
I
Yeah,
wanna
right.
live out of a suitcase. Yeah, yeah.
Well, it was interesting because I had that outlet for 10 years. I sang with an a cappella doo-wop group, and we were
Wow.
pretty good. I mean, we traveled a bit. We had CDs out in the stores. We opened for Ray Charles. I mean, it was,
Wow.
if you saw like Pitch Perfect, that was us, but we all had jobs. I had a guy who was PhD in biochemistry. Another guy was a sales guy. So by day, I was PR director at Children's Hospital.
Yeah.
And by night, we'd play Rockstar and do like a 3-hour show a cappella. So it was super fun.
You got images from back then?
I do. And not only did I have a mullet, I had a permed mullet.
I
That's-
love it. Yeah.
That's how John Stamos I was at the time.
Ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. Everything's going my way.
But I loved it. So I had kind of that real great balance, and I was dating a lot. I'm in my 20s, and so by day I was doing PR and media for Children's Hospital. And what happened was, to answer your question, is I would get asked occasionally to come. Would you come and speak to a community group, or would you serve on this panel about marketing or whatever else? And when I left them and I started my own PR firm, PR marketing, one of my clients early on was a guy who was a professional speaker, and he said, can you help me get press? Right? I was helping people get in the newspaper and things like that. And that's when I sat across from the guy, and I remember talking to him, and I went, wait, you make how much money to talk for an hour? And he laughed and he said, yes, I do, but I don't do it every hour. And so that was sort of the first inclination of the business of what this is,
Yep.
and that you can get paid to stand on stage and teach people what you know. And, I've always been very comfortable on stage, and people still ask if I ever get nervous. And I'm like, no,
Doesn't
I
happen.
don't. I don't, because I only talk about the things I'm an expert on and
Yep.
that I know what I'm doing. If somebody asked me to get up and talk about, animal husbandry, I have no idea what I, but I'm good at this. This is what I've been doing for a long time.
Yeah.
But that's when I sort of realized, wow, you can actually, because I was sort of in the place where I was doing the marketing and PR, and I was getting a little bit older and a little bit burnt out on doing the grunt work. And it wasn't because I was above it.
Yeah.
I was just tired of it. And I
Yeah.
learned a lot. And I was tired of working for people who knew less than I did. Right.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm where I am now. Like, I'll only report in my consulting work. I'll only report to the CEO or somebody who's an SVP.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to report to your marketing manager.
Right.
Because I've earned the right to work on a higher level. And so I was there. But that was sort of the pivot of realizing that instead of just doing the work, I can get paid to teach other people what I've learned.
Yeah.
And so, what a great industry. But then people always talk about getting on the speaking circuit. And I've come to realize there is no circuit.
Right.
There is no speaking circuit. There are gigs.
Yeah.
And so I'm actually asked quite often to speak to other speaker organizations. And I've spoken to 10 of the international in different countries around the world.
Yeah.
And sort of dispelling some of those myths of the profession. And the reality is speaking is not a business. Getting the gig is the business. Speaking is the performance. We love that.
Yeah.
Getting the gig is the hard part.
So
And
it's a really hustle.
yeah, and there are systems and processes and reaching the right people and being persuasive and beating out others and tailoring your content.
Yep.
90% of aspiring speakers leave within 18 months to 24 months because they're starving. Because they think that if they go take a 4-day boot camp on hand gestures, their phone's going to ring. It's like, phone doesn't ring, you know? So anyway, there's a whole other conversation. But to answer your question, it was, I developed a measure of expertise. And then I realized there was another venue and vehicle to share that knowledge and to monetize the content that was in my brain.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that the industry has said for many years is that we're not selling speeches, we're selling wisdom. And that wisdom can be delivered across a variety of platforms.
Right.
Speeches, books. I've written 7 books now, and consulting and all of that as well. So it's an interesting industry.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate to be invited around the world to do it.
So I've got to ask though, a lot of times, you know, when you're traveling and you're giving the speeches, a lot of times these speeches end up being, you know, pretty similar to one another.
Sure.
Right. And so does that ever get old? Do you ever wish, like, you know, you could improv more on stage? That you're like, oh man, I wish I could.
I think you're assuming I don't.
That's fair. That's very fair.
But it's a great way. For the first part of what you said, it is essentially the same presentation, but for a reason. So I don't do custom. I tailor 100%, but they're bringing me in to share what I know. I'm not there shilling for the company. Generally, the conferences I'm at is they'll have a number of speakers. Most of them are from the industry, maybe vendors and others who are sharing something.
Okay.
My role is to be that outside voice. Here's what we're seeing across a variety of industries and how what we can learn from that kind of a thing as well. But in my mind, it's a living presentation. So everyone, I know my content well enough that I can pivot. I can go on tangents. I can talk about things specifically to their industry.
Right.
My slides just keep me on track because
There's a
I will go off on tangents all the time.
Yeah.
So there's a structure to it. But the content, there's always something new or something I'll try. And then sometimes maybe it's even humor that I'll try that I'll just think of in the moment because I'm pretty irreverent. And then occasionally in my mind I'll go, that worked, you know, and then other times it won't. And then I'll even say it out loud. Okay, kill the bit about so and so, and then I'll get a laugh on that.
Just like Jerry Seinfeld does.
Yeah,
Right.
And so
You
then I'll
play it
get a
out.
laugh on that. So I do a lot of prep
Yep.
for the presentation. So I've got a basic structure. I tailor it for their industry, but I'm always adding something new. I'm always putting new content, new research, throw in a new slide. I did one over the summer, actually tailored for my industry. I did main stage for the National Speakers Association. So it was a huge honor for me to be invited. So I'm in front of all of my peers on the main stage. And and I did a whole custom presentation for that. But one of the things I did a little game show in the middle.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
it was called Truth or Nonsense. It was like meeting planner, truth or nonsense. And then they shouted out things, and I had music, and I had all this stuff that I had gotten done for it. It killed. It worked so well. I do it in every presentation now. And then I just change all the questions to things that have to do with their industry.
That's so smart.
Whether
That's
it's the
great.
apartment industry, it's
Yeah.
financial
Yeah.
services, it's hotel hospitality, it's restaurant or retail. So I just change the question, but I've got music, and it's like game show stuff, and just a segment in the middle to keep it entertaining, to keep it lively. But I don't get burnt out on it because it always changes. And when somebody hires me, sometimes they'll hire me for 8 to 18 months out, and they'll say, "Can you send me your slide deck?" And I said, "Not until 2 weeks before, because what I'm going to do for you then is not what I'm doing today, because I'm going to learn a lot between now and then."
Yep.
A new study. I'm actually working on a research study myself that I'm funding that will drive a whole bunch of new content. So it keeps it really interesting for me. But it's also one of the reasons why I write books is to stay relevant. I mean, granted, you want to be top of mind.
Yeah.
Why we're talking this guy, you can't like keep reliving the successes from 20 years ago.
Right.
But because there's something new to say, there's something new to learn, there's new research, there's new trends.
Right.
And so I generally, the title shifts a little bit, but I don't come up with a new presentation. I just keep enhancing and revising my core content.
See, the way I've always thought about speaking tours and stuff, I'd always been kind of like against the idea, just because doing the same thing over and over just sounds kind of boring.
Right.
The way he's describing
I
it,
don't have a
though,
memorized. I don't have a memorized speech. I mean, I
yeah,
have general
yeah,
content, but yeah,
yeah. But the way he's describing it sounds like when I'm running a one shot in Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Okay.
You have your entire thing set up. You know, like the main steps you have to get to, all the different floors.
Right.
But it's different for every party because all the people are different. The battle might go different, and
Right.
you know you're going to throw in a different, you know, random thing. Because you're like, well, I need 30 more minutes. I'm going to do this thing instead. But
Right.
it's the same roadmap. That makes it sound a lot
yeah.
more
But
interesting.
also for like John, if you were to teach, because you've done marketing for so many years and been a
Right.
fractional CMO, what you would have taught 5 years ago is different today. Strategically similar,
6 months ago.
tactically very different.
Very.
Right?
Yes.
Because like I wrote books on marketing. My kids run circles around me.
Yeah.
I have a lot of knowledge, but the tactics are changing and changing. So if you were out teaching and presenting, what you would do for a manufacturing organization is going to be different than what you do for a law firm or financial services,
Yes.
right? The core messages, the core lessons, the core structure
Right.
is your knowledge, what you've put together, what you've crafted,
Right.
but the application is always very, very tailored to the industry.
Yes. Oh, how it would be.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. You know, thinking about you, you got into really the customer service aspect of being observant of how people are treated. And I'm wondering how much of that came from, like we talked about, you're talking with your children and observing the staff at a hotel.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing with all of your travel, there's probably a lot of, that probably could have gone a lot better if we
Yeah.
had done it differently. And I want to understand that transition to where you were talking about just that whole experience and the customer service, and you even have this metric which I thought was really cute, the net easy score, if I have that right.
I think so. I'm trying to
Yeah.
remember all this stuff. I had a
Yeah.
recent book, and I'm
That's the
numb.
one I'm thinking
I'm
about,
numb
right.
from my own book. Yeah.
But it's so cute. I mean, it's
Yeah.
how easy it is to do business with people.
Yeah,
I think that's
absolutely.
really cool.
Well, here's is an answer I don't think you're going to expect.
Yeah.
It came from the shift from marketing to customer experience, and I'll
Right.
draw the distinction between customer service and customer experience, came just because the market shifted. And as a longtime marketing guy, the things that we say about ourselves is less impactful today than what other people say about us. And so that's what started my research and my shift
Got
from
it.
marketing it became really that primary driver for consumer behavior,
Right.
is that we'll go to Yelp and TripAdvisor
Yep.
and Rotten Tomatoes,
Yep.
and their jingle is less important. It's not unimportant. Marketing is not unimportant, but what's really important is that social proof, that consensus in the marketplace. But the content, I would love to be able to say it came from this warm place in my heart and wanting to help people, enhance how they serve. It came from the fact that I'm really impatient and the things that frustrated me. And so my first book in the customer experience realm was a book called Why Customers Leave and How to Win Them Back. And that was a bit of a stretch for me because it was a new subject matter. But I said at the beginning of it and then in the foreword that to be prepared, this is a bit of a rant. We're in 5 languages now for that book. I mean, it's astonishing how
Congratulations.
much it resonated.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
the things that, pardon the language, things that piss me off, apparently we're pissing a lot of people off. But what's interesting was I would be able to run some of the stuff. My wife she's got her master's in psychology. She's a great sounding board, but part of it because we're very different people.
Mhm.
She's fine with certain things that make me so frustrated. She loves self-checkout. I want to take the scanning gun and blow my head off because I'm just not very good at it. And so, and of course, there's a lot of humor that can come from that as well.
Right.
But I started really sort of looking at what are all these points of friction, of frustration for customers and clients, and how can I be of service to help companies get better,
Yeah.
to stop frustrating their customers and clients. I was on
Sure.
a podcast and somebody asked me, if we've been talking about this for 50 years, why do companies just not get it? And I said, I think of course they get it. I'm a big fan of business. I think business people are very, very smart, but it's just hard. It's hard balancing predictability and profitability and all with changing customer preferences. And so, there's certain things that we just don't want to do this because it may not be profitable. And so that's why I make a living. because I help them do that better. But I don't think it, I would love to say it came from a place of being magnanimous and wanting to be of service. No, it came from because I'm easily annoyed.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And
Right.
so, and or once again, as my middle daughter would say, have you met my dad? Yeah. And so the things that my wife would prefer that I just let go, but now I can channel it. And I want to have a negative experience. We always say as speakers, we don't have bad experiences. We get new stories to tell.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
so,
Right.
when
Right.
I'm driving through a Wendy's and I ask them if I can get the two breakfast sandwiches for $2 deal, and they said, no, you need to use the app. I said, well, I don't have the app. And they said, well, you can pull over and download it. I said, thank you for that permission. I said, I'm at the drive-through. Can I just get it right now? And they said, no.
No.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
and so the old me, and old me means 10 years ago, would be like, I'll go online and rant about it or tell them off. And the new me pulls over and said, okay, let's see how long this takes,
Yes.
because there's a lesson in this. So I've created this new filter that I'm always looking for. Where's the deficiency? Where's the false,
Yep.
the bad mindset that I can be of service?
Right.
But my wife's a great sounding board because she's very patient and tolerant. She's an angel. My 26-year-old assistant, Hannah, is a great sounding board because she looks at it through a millennial lens.
Yes.
I look at it through a boomer lens.
Right.
And so, once again, back to business, all of these are fodder for lessons, for teaching, for consulting, for supporting my family.
Right. Right.
Yep.
Yeah, I was doing a project for so it's called the Buyer Persona Institute. So we interview a lot of double-blind surveys, and this had to do with convenience food. So we
Sure.
interviewed franchise owners at Wendy's and McDonald's and so forth, and some of it had to do with customer service. And this was completely brand new to me. I had no idea that when you're pulling up and they see you on the monitor,
Yeah.
it's not somebody in the restaurant that's seeing you. They're in the
They're off
Philippines
site. Yeah.
someplace, right? And so there's a lot that gets lost in just the translation and the language issues and the microphone in a snowstorm and so forth, right? I had no idea.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting is that, and I define my subject matter as customer experience, and
Right.
customer service is we know how to treat people. Granted, we have younger employees. We
Sure.
need to train them. Here's what our culture. Here's what we expect.
Yeah, yeah.
But the experience is so different today from a customer's perspective.
Right.
How easy is it to communicate or understand or pay
Yeah.
or contact or when I speak to, and I've spoken to so many of the CEO roundtable groups, I used to lead those groups as well. And I would ask the leaders, what do you think your competitive advantage is? We always get some version of
There we
quality.
go.
It's
Yeah.
our quality,
Yeah.
commitment, caring, trust. It's
Yeah.
about the people.
Yeah.
And as I work today, I say, well, here's what the research shows. Your customers are assuming quality. You better be good. I mean, you wouldn't be and they're prioritizing speed.
Yep.
Speed of communication, speed of issue resolution, speed of answers, speed of access, simplicity of process.
Right.
Right. If I type in my username and my password, and I get one letter wrong in my password, do I have to type in my username again? Right. That hashtag first world problems.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
But you'll see companies from a UX, the user experience perspective, they're trying to shave an eighth of a second. How fast can we get that transaction?
Right. Right.
And then the final thing is convenience.
Yeah.
Right. And opposite of convenience is inconvenient. How convenient are we? So the customer experience from their perspective, they ask themselves the question, was that frustrating? Was it simple? Was it intuitive?
Yeah.
Was it right? And so because we can, I mean, people would ask with my book, which was called Why Customers Leave. Say, why do customers leave? They leave because they can, because we have
Right.
choices.
Yeah.
Right. There was something a little negative about that. The book did
Right.
really well,
Yeah.
and the new book is about being ridiculously easy to do business with. What does
Right.
that look like, and all the
Yeah.
case studies and everything else that I cover in that.
Yeah, I still love that presentation that Steve Jobs did years ago. That he's literally schooling someone in the audience, and he said, "You start with the customer experience, and then you work backwards."
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And
But
so many companies said they'd start with the technology. What can we do?
Exactly.
And then
right.
ask the question, is there a market for that?
Right.
I refer that as a solution looking for a problem.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly.
Right. And the tech people, and that's one of my audiences, is how do we connect that product development people with it? But is so brilliant, such a great observation, Steve Jobs' part, which is what do the customers want? How do we make that easier for them?
Yeah.
But in my business, I just deal with that one sliver of that,
Yeah.
which is what's that process? What's the mindset? Do we have policies that say no to stupid things?
Yeah.
And so, we get this all the time. Somebody will be in a restaurant with their friends and say, I'd like to do the chicken Caesar salad. Can I get shrimp instead of chicken? And they always say no menu substitutions. And I was like, why?
Right. It's a restaurant.
It's a different protein.
Right.
But just charge her $2 more and she'll be thrilled.
Right.
But it's so easy to be lazy but the pushback I get all the time is, well, if we do it for her, we have to do it for everybody.
Yeah,
and I always say, no, you don't. It's your business. Do whatever you want. And they look at me like, oh, I guess. So the whole idea of being of service is important. Anyway, I don't want to go down
that's
rabbit
great.
hole here.
No, I mean, you remind me of a lot of things that Luke Wroblewski has said over the years of things like technology is there to hide the complexity.
Right.
The more technology you have, the more complexity it should be hidden.
Right.
And he's showing, really, great graphs of like, here's like the 20 steps that it usually takes to put a credit card in. And this is how Apple Pay basically hides all of it.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, that's exactly.
Can
that's
you
what
do
you
it
should
with
aim
one?
for.
The only way you can do something with one click is because behind the scenes, all of the rest of that is
Yeah.
taken care of.
Totally
Well, that's what
changes.
I'm super jazzed about the future, even in the next 6 months with language models, especially, is that you now have a way to give people what they want at the exact moment in time that they want it. You don't have to give them anything else. And so, like, the customer experience becomes more and more extremely personalized for everyone. And it's amazing.
And expedited, which is really important, is if you can get to what they want quickly. How often are we calling organizations and you hear on the phone, please listen closely as our menu options have changed.
Oh, yes.
And now you're going to hear 9 things. And this whole concept of helping people get to what they want very, very quickly.
Yep.
There's too many companies that want to guide them down. Here's how you do this, and then you do this, so that they have predictability. and the analogy I always use is I say, listen, nobody wants to stand in line at the buffet if they just want to refill their drink.
Yep. Exactly.
Help them get to that quickly. But that's the other challenge with like chatbots and things like that. I understand they're going to get better. But I admonish organizational leaders all the time. And I say, listen, your digital assistants, your chatbots, they're not to be deployed so you don't have to talk to your customers. It's so that you can offload pedestrian issues and you have time to talk to the customers who need it.
Yeah, exactly.
But we're yelling into our phone, real person,
Exactly.
agent.
Right.
Well,
I think you said no.
When you approach design from the standpoint of realizing that my job is to get you in and out as fast as possible because you want to spend time with your kids. That's the example I've given like everyone, because people get it. Like, you're right. I actually don't want to be on your website. I don't want to use your app. I don't want to do any of it. But if you can promise that by doing this, it will save me 5 minutes of time and I can eat my food with my kid in my car instead, any day. Yeah. Any day.
And unfortunately, some of the conversation is, how do we develop the relationship, right? From the business perspective, how do we give them this? And I tell them sometimes, your customer doesn't want a relationship with you.
Yeah,
they want to buy something.
Yeah.
And you want the relationship. It doesn't mean that relationship's a bad thing, but
it's not right now.
And relationships don't attract customers. They retain customers. And I say, what's your competitive advantage? Say, it's the relationship that we have. I said, but what about for new customers? Because they're not coming to you for a relationship. They're coming to you to solve a problem.
Yes.
Right. What's the old adage? I said, when you go to the hardware store and you're going to buy a drill, right? What's the need?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
you need a hole.
Right.
Right. But that's the best tool, right?
Yeah.
But for people, they come to you because they need something. They need a problem solved. They need a product. They need a service, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
But there's so much conversations about the relationship. Now, relationship is retention.
Yeah.
You want to build the business. But retention is important.
I love what you're talking about with the unique selling proposition.
Absolutely.
That's so true. And
that's the part that's universal, right?
Yes.
John, for you and I, marketing for so long,
yeah,
the tactics are all changing, but it still comes down to that.
Yeah. And it's one of the things that we're working on is to give a sales manager the opportunity to poll or survey their sales team on what they all believe, or each of them believe, is their unique selling proposition, and how many of them are even selling the same thing, right?
And how often are we not aligned?
Absolutely, right? So you can imagine asking your 40 salespeople to just give me what your USP is, right? And then to pull that all up, you know that they're all selling something different.
It's all, I talk about this, and it goes back to what David was saying about even sort of the family. What are our family values? Are we aligned as an organization?
Yeah.
And I'll ask leaders, I said, if I take your top salespeople and put them all in a separate room and ask them,
Yes.
what's your competitive advantage? What's your unique selling proposition?
Right.
Am I going to hear the same thing?
Yeah.
Have you not had these conversations?
Yes.
And then it goes to a deeper level, which is it really what you think it is?
Yes.
You know, so often as I've
Yep.
done the Convene or the Vistage or the YPO and these groups, and I'd ask them that competitive advantage, the amount of people that would say things like, in majority, it's our quality.
Right.
And I look at them, I'm like, it's so adorable that you actually believe that. So you're saying that your competitors are consistently underperforming? The hard truth is everybody's good, or you wouldn't survive. Right. Or good enough, sometimes good enough at a better price point.
Yep.
But getting them out of this mindset that I love that they drink the Kool-Aid, right? That we're so good. Or I would get somebody who would say, my competitive advantage, I'm just gonna say it. I'm just gonna say it. We actually do what we say we're gonna do. And he thinks it's a mic drop. And I'm like, how on God's green earth are your competitors staying in business with all of that not doing what they say they're going to do? I said, you think your competitors aren't doing what they say they're going to do?
Yep.
It's just, or here's the other one. I did this. I was in front of 10,000 people in Bangkok, Thailand. And it's just from all around, from $1 million roundtable, all life insurance people. And they think their competitive advantage is we really listen to our customers and we tailor our solutions to meet their individual
As opposed
needs. To everybody else who doesn't listen.
Right.
But the amount of people who will just say that with us, like, here's the difference. We really take the time to listen. And I said, would you be surprised that your competitors say the exact same thing? And they're like,
Right.
Just this delusion that they're the only ones who care.
So true.
See what it's like to do business with people who love what they do. or just the basic one of just saying our people make the difference. I'm like, everybody's people make the difference. It's not always a good difference, but
Oh yeah,
everybody's got people.
Of being customer centric or company centric.
Yeah.
And the thing that is like so amazing, it reminds me of an experiment we ran a while back for a cleaning company, and we added two extra questions on their forms. And one of them was, why was today the day you decided to actually contact us?
Nice, like that.
And what people tell you is amazing, because asking that type of a question is how you find out what is it we're actually selling. And the one I'll remember the most is one guy saying, the reason I reached out today is because I came home from our warehouse and my wife told me I smelled awful. I'm like, you give that answer to any sales guy, you'll never lose anything, because now I'm speaking to you.
Right.
Now my selling proposition is, hey, you know what? You know what we're going to do? I'm going to make it so your wife never says that to you ever again.
Right.
I'm going to make it sure that you never even have to worry about that. I'm going to call you back in 3 months and ask if your relationship is better.
Right. Yeah. And some of the stuff, it sounds basic. It's one of those things that is simple, but it's not easy. And the part that really makes it not easy is everything is changing.
Yeah.
How we connect is changing. How we complain is different, right?
Yes.
How we pay. People ask me all the time, do you take PayPal? Do you take Zelle or Square or Zelle? I'm like, yes.
Yes.
They're trying to pay me. Yes. So companies get a little rigid.
Yeah.
So I got to shift over quick here to, so we're now painting the picture a little bit more, right? So you got a full scholarship for, basically, acting. You go over to saying, hey, I love speaking. I want to actually teach people what I've learned. And now you're joining different groups, like Vistage groups, etc., where you can go in a smaller setting and, again, teach people what you've learned, but, much more personalized context.
Yeah.
And so what I'd love to ask you is, what do you do when you go to all these groups, because I'm sure it happens to all of them, and you tell these people the answer to all their questions and exactly what they should be doing, and they listen, but they never do anything? What do you do?
Here's one of the challenges of my business model is I oftentimes, unless I'm consulting, um, it's a hit and run. And so I oftentimes don't know what it is that they do with the content that I have. I part of my business model is consulting as well. I'll talk to organizational leaders. I'll say, it's really important that we keep the momentum and that we don't lose momentum, that we keep the conversation going.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have a variety of ways. I've got something called the Morning Huddle, which is a year-long
Right.
video series.
Right.
But hopefully I can do consulting and have a chance to really affect some real change. But it's one of the realities of this business. I speak for a living. I speak at a conference. I sell and sign books in the back, and I'm gone. I don't mean in any way to diminish or minimize the value that I think I provide,
Sure.
because I think I do provide tremendous value. But it's a real challenge. When I'll talk to certain prospects, and they'll say, give me an example of what they do with this and how we, can justify the expenditure. I don't know that I know that.
Yeah.
And so that's just the reality of my business model. But in an odd sort of a twist on this, there's a lot of people who can drive down the street and they can point to their kids and say, I helped build that building.
Yeah.
I helped do that. I'm not one of those people. And so there has been this part of me, this drive and to create things that are tangible. So I think on one aspect, writing the books is a tangible manifestation of the knowledge and what I've learned and what I've shared.
Right.
It's a legacy piece for me. I mean, granted, it's a business strategy to
Yeah.
be sure,
Yeah.
give them a taste of that knowledge. But then there's also personal part of me that I really enjoy construction projects. I do tile work. I build things. I build a mantle. When my mom passed away about a decade ago, each of us, I'm second oldest of six, once again, and we all got a little bit of money, not a lot. And they did different things. They took vacations or other things, but I went and bought tools.
Yeah.
I bought my father had this Sears Craftsman set, and I'm like, I want to get my own set of tools that match,
Right.
and to be able to build things that are tangible. So
Yeah.
What is it about building that is so like relieving and fun to you? Because it's super frustrating to tons of other people. What is it that makes it just like so much fun?
I think maybe the process itself, it's just being proud of yourself that you were able to do something. But I think there's also a work product that comes out of it.
Right.
Um, I like to cook. It's one of the things that I when I'm home, I do the cooking. I really like that. But when it's done, it's done. The only thing left over is dishes.
Yeah,
You
that's
got to
true.
clean up. So
Yeah.
to have something that's tangible at the end that you can say,
That you can point to and say, "Hey, I built
I
that."
did that, 100%.
Yeah.
So that part's really fun for me, and especially when it's home improvement that you get to sort of see it every day. So
Right.
it's something I'm pretty good at, and something I really enjoy.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I was thinking about just the books you've written and so forth.
Yeah.
Is there any that you would go back and rewrite?
Oh,
like
yes.
there's a couple of things in there maybe I wasn't right about, or
What's so funny is my very first book, and this is what a lot of people do, and I'm not proud of it, but I'll admit it, is a lot of people for their first book, they look at saying, I have 2 years worth of blogs. I can just compile all of that and turn it into a book. I mean,
Right.
that's kind of what I did with my first book. And it was
Okay.
about 2/3 of the content was content that I'd already written.
Okay.
Now, granted, I wrote all of it and I was proud of all of it, but it wasn't particularly linear.
Yeah.
But when you talk about going back, I had a chapter on MySpace. That's how old. So I had to deal with John Wiley and Sons for my first book, and the book was called "It's Not Who You Know, It's Who Knows You."
Yep.
And so it was
Good
pretty
title.
popular, yeah, because it's that twist on that. Well, where everybody says it's all about who you know, and I said no, it's about who knows you, right? Good marketing title. But when we sold out, and I published a second edition, I took the opportunity to update it, which was really important because in the marketing world, everything was changing so fast that
Yep.
Right.
there were certain things I wrote that just didn't. But so I deleted the chapter on MySpace because that clearly wasn't a thing. And instead of I just changed Paris Hilton to Kim Kardashian. updated. So yeah, I go back. I mean, we all look back sort of in our youth and other things like, God, I wish I could go back and do that again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was on a podcast and a good colleague, Stacy Sherman, was interviewing me. At the very end, she goes, okay, so here's what I ask for every guest. And she says, if you could go back and tell your 20-year-old self something, what advice would you give? And I thought for a second, I said, talk to the girl. She's probably nervous too. And she started laughing. She goes, I meant business. Well, you said you didn't say business. Like, what would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Yeah.
Go talk to the girl,
Right.
be courageous. But it's the same thing for business. You look back and you're like, it was smart for the time. It was smart for what I knew.
Yeah.
You look at hairstyles and you look dorky, but everybody, that was cool back then, right?
Yep,
Right.
yep,
So,
yep.
but it's a great question. I'll still get requests for early books, and I will tell them you don't want to read it. I just went out and did a half-day consulting for an organization, landscape company, and they're loving my book, Why Customers Leave. Well, it was 2 books ago.
Yeah.
And they were saying we went online, we couldn't find any more. I said, because it's out of print. And they said, oh, because we're like halfway through it. We have our Why Customers Leave groups. We're all reading it together. And I was like, really,
Wow.
really honored. And I sat through and they had all of their year in advance, their strategy and all. And half of the concepts were straight out of my book. But it was 2 books ago. And so it was still really flattering. And I said, I got a new book. And they said, well, we'd love to buy all the new books, but we're going to get through this one first. I mean, I'm still
Wow.
very proud of my books, but you're like, I've learned so much more since then,
Sure.
but it's still recognized that there's still value
Yeah,
in
that's
that.
awesome.
But when somebody asks for like my first book, 'cause they love the title, I'm like, you know what, don't buy the book. So it's well, because so much stuff, so much of the content just isn't accurate anymore.
Yeah. How has there ever been a book that you're like, man, I'd love to write about this, but I'd be like scared to or worried about doing it? You're like, man, maybe someday I'll have the opportunity to write.
This is going to sound arrogant in some way. I'm not scared or worried about anything. I'm just not that person. I saw somebody. I see this quote all the time that said, and I'm going to explain so that doesn't come across as arrogant. That everything you want in life is on the other side of fear. You see that all the time.
Sure.
And I'm like, I think everything you want in life is on the other side of hard work. And I think I'm so pithy and smart. And my wife looks at me and she says, everybody's not you, David. Some people didn't have really loving parents who told them that they were brilliant and beautiful.
Yeah.
And I really recognize that. I don't come from that perspective of things that I have trepidation or fear. I kind of look at things as the next adventure. And my real struggle is just recognizing my limitations.
Yeah.
And I just can't say yes to everything, even if I want to say yes to everything.
Right.
I've got to make a living.
Yeah.
I have 5 colleges to pay for. And so when I get asked by somebody coming by and saying, would you serve on the board for the homeowners association, everything inside of me wants to say, of course.
Sure.
And then I look at my obligations, like stop jumping into everything with 2 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm also balanced. I mean, I don't jump into things that I don't know what I'm doing, but every kind of opportunity, and people say, don't chase 2 rabbits. You're not going to catch either one of them. I chase 12 at a time because that sounds fun. And let's do that. And the only parts that are really hard, which is kind of interesting for my business, is writing books. It's hard. A famous author, I can't remember her name, but she was asked this. I love this answer. She was asked if she enjoyed writing, and she said, I love to have written.
Yeah, that's a good
Isn't
way
that
to put it.
great?
Yeah, that's a really good.
There's
yeah.
nothing better when that
Yes.
box shows up on the front doorstep,
Yeah.
and you open that box and you pick up that book and you're like, I did this.
Yep.
Like, that's my book. Like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
even 7 books, I still have that feeling.
Yeah, that's cool.
The thought of having to write another book,
Yeah.
ugh,
Yeah.
just like daunting.
Oh yeah.
And so I actually hold a retreat a couple of times a year called Write Your Book Retreat. And I just help other people over
Oh,
that
so
hump
cool.
and help people write their first book. And I charge very little just to cover my costs, but it's one of my legacy things just to give back. and to help people, because tell them that millions and millions of people talk about wanting to write a book and very few ever actually do.
That's so true.
And so
Yeah.
that's sort of a legacy thing too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's great. I love that idea.
But I'm in that place right now where I'm in my third act.
Yeah.
What do they say? The first one is learning. Second act is earning. And somebody said the third act is returning or whatever, like how are we giving back?
Right.
But I'm very cognizant, and I'm going to get a little philosophical right now. I'm very cognizant that I have more history than I have future.
Okay.
And I want to use that time. There's a very famous poem by a woman named Linda Ellis. And in the poem, she talks about the most important etching on your tombstone. You might have heard this. It's not your name. It's not the day you were born. It's not the day that you died. It's what?
The dash.
It's the dash.
Right.
Because that dash represents everything that you've won and lost and learned and loved and everything else. And I'm so committed to that. It was so moving to me that a year ago I sat in a chair for about 9 excruciating minutes.
Okay.
And I got my dash tattooed on my wrist.
Wow.
And I look at this every day and I say, how am I living my dash? What am I doing? And I don't know that I've always been this person.
Yeah.
I think I've always been a good guy, but
Right.
you have different phases of your life and the stress of work and super ambitious. And all of those things are still a part of me.
Right.
But I'm very cognizant that I want to use this time. I did an exercise once when I was a chair for Vistage, CEO group like Convene and some great organizations. But we did a retreat for all of the Denver area group chairs. So we all went on retreat up in the mountains and we did some, self-discovery exercises and some other things as well. But we did this one about sort of creating your life's mission statement.
Right.
And I'll tell you, there's a part of me that's a little cynical and, yes, it's fun. It was awesome. I mean, it was awesome. I don't know that I had the right mindset. It was like, now we're going to do touchy-feely stuff. And but it was awesome. And here's what I came up with. And I have this in my office on the wall next to my desk. And it's a very simple, and this is much more of my third act mission statement. This is my North Star. And here's a very simple statement. It says this: I want to spend my life doing things that matter with people who care.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's my criteria. If I have opportunities, does it matter?
Yep.
Yeah. And I don't people who are detractors or naysayers, I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because I don't have to. When I was 30, I did. Right. You have a lot of have-tos in your life when you're supporting your families. Yeah. I still have a lot of have-tos, but I have a lot more get-tos.
Yep.
And being empty nesters, we got up on Saturday morning and my wife looked at me. She goes, we got to do today. And I say, what? And she goes, nothing. Let's go for a walk. Let's go grab breakfast.
Yeah, I love it.
I'm still working. I'll work for the rest of my life because I love what I do.
Yeah.
But there is a freedom. I mean, do you feel that, Dave?
Yeah.
I mean, John, sorry, do you feel that as well?
Well, I'm still very much working.
I am too.
Right?
I am too.
Yeah.
I'm not anywhere near, but I'm saying,
yeah.
But in addition to the work,
yeah,
you're very selective about things you want to spend your time on.
I think David had just a real cool opportunity when you were in Vegas and you really came to this. You can tell the story about, who we really want to work with and the kind of things that we want to do. Even this itself is this is just a passion project.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no money tied to this at all, which I think makes it a lot more pure in what we're trying to accomplish and share stories like yours with other people. But go ahead and tell them what.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so, I was out in Vegas. I basically got flown out and put in a hotel by one of my really good friends, Dennis Yu. Like, pay for everything. Like, dude is incredible. And I'm here stressed out, didn't get a lot to eat the day before we were supposed to do something because we have a couple clients that we didn't really enjoy. But you doing it because great, you got to pay the bills. Right?
Absolutely.
Right.
And so we go to a spa and it's a lot of fun. And then he's like, all right, surprise workout time. And he calls in one of his buddies who's like a really well-known fitness trainer. I'm like, okay. Like he just does this stuff. He loves doing this stuff. And so me and Anthony we're after a spa where it's working out, getting our butts kicked. And mind you, so I'm high anxiety, high stress, and I didn't really eat. And I'm like, whoa, I don't feel that good. And I walk over to the couch and I sit down and instantly I lose all vision. I'm blind for 15 minutes and I'm freaking out.
Oh my gosh.
And I have my two buddies, Dennis and Anthony. I have Dennis, who's on my left side, being like, you'll be fine. I have been through this before. You need exactly 15 minutes. Like, but of course, 15 minutes feels like an hour. Cause I'm like, will I ever be able to see
That's
again? I'm like
scary.
crying, like, oh, it's horrible. And I have my buddy Anthony on my other side, like he's on his knees, he's praying over me for 15 minutes straight. Dude has a heart of gold. And he's dumping orange juice down my gullet to get my blood sugar levels up.
Sure.
And eventually my eyes, like I could see again, like things start to get blurry and then color comes back. I'm like, wow.
What just happened?
Yeah. And it was that moment that what people like Dennis had told me for a long time, which were things like, hey, the only thing that matters is spending time with really cool people, with people that just bring you energy.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I'm like, okay, I understand now exactly what that means. Because before, I didn't quite understand it.
Right.
And now I'm like, yeah, if spending time with people that just take my energy away, even if it might mean by saying no, I'm not going to be able to make as much money or something like that, it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, man.
There's such power in the most powerful word in the English language, right? Which of course is no.
Yep.
And being able to say no to things that don't serve you. I think
Yep.
having some measure of success,
Yeah.
that's the greatest, I think the greatest gift of that is being able to it's what we call, and pardon the language, it's the no asshole rule,
Yep,
right?
exactly.
And everybody in
Yep.
business should have that.
Yeah.
And it's just, and when you're young, you don't recognize the clients that may end up being real pain.
Yeah.
And I think you have a better radar when you're older. Like, I think I need to trust my gut. I don't think that's the right. I mean, I still have to work. I'm working.
More
for the rest
people
of my
need to
life.
trust their gut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But to do things that align with who you are.
Yeah.
You know,
So true.
it's I learned this early on, and I guess to an extent I've sort of adopted it. But somebody had said once when they were looking at what clients they accept,
Yep.
and they had the 3 F's rule. And the 3 F's are fun, fame, or fortune. And if it's not 2 of the 3 F's, you say no. Fun, fame, and fortune, right?
Yep.
And they said the only caveat was the fortune one is really big, then screw the other 2, we'll make
Yep.
it work. You know?
Yeah.
But it takes a lot out of you
Oh,
to
yeah.
deal with difficult people or to do the things that you don't want to do. And I was talking to a colleague of mine who's sort of in the same age as me. And we were talking about sort of what does it mean to be kind of in your third act. And one of the things our consensus was, I don't want to do the things I don't want to do anymore.
Yep. Amen.
Right. And,
Yep.
and none of that has to do with work, but it's just, when my wife and I got together, and my current and final and greatest wife, we've been together 11 years, and we also were very cerebral. I mean, she's beautiful and madly in love, but we started thinking about what do we want? What do we not want?
Yeah.
One of the things she said once, we were literally just pulled up to a stoplight, and she just blurts out, all right, I'll go camping with you, but I don't want to sleep on the ground ever again. We hadn't even talked about camping, but she started thinking about, if I'm going to get in another relationship, what are the things I never want to do again? She's like, I don't want to sleep on the ground. I said, that's okay. I probably won't take you camping. I'll go with my son.
Or go glamping.
Yeah.
You know?
But it's all those kind of funny things of I want to do the things I want to do.
Yeah.
And what does this time, and I guess it doesn't have to start in your third act.
Yeah.
What does this time afford you? It's one of the challenges, like going through a divorce, and John, you and I have both been through that, is I used to do a lot of executive coaching. And when I led my CEO roundtable groups, we would do a 2-hour one-to-one with all of our members. So I did hundreds of hours of executive coaching, but I had a member who was going through a very, very difficult divorce. And it got to the point where in our one-to-ones, that's pretty much what he wanted to talk about every time.
Right.
And I finally had said to him once that you absolutely deserve the time to grieve. And you are very clear on what this has cost you. I want to talk about, what does this afford you?
Right.
In other words, if you look ahead for the next 5 years, if you had not gotten divorced in this very difficult situation, where would you be? Now, even though you didn't want to be where you are, what do you get to do that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise?
Yes.
Yep.
Relationships, travel,
Yep.
just not feeling like you're walking on eggshells in your own home,
Right.
right? And so this whole mind shift of, I kind of try and look at every situation. All right, what does this afford me?
Yeah.
And where we are now is a great opportunity to travel and stay. One of the things I agreed with my wife, because she'll go with me when it's a good trip. A lot of them are just, you're in, and pardon the people in Toledo or Cleveland or whatever else. But one of the things that I decided to do is that I decided to try and, in almost every case when I can, is book one extra day for all, because I'd normally fly in and out and do a
Yes.
gig, one extra day and connect with an old friend.
Yeah, that's
And you can
great.
find them on Facebook or
Yes.
LinkedIn,
Yep.
who lives in
Yep.
that city.
Yeah.
And part of it's not like the I'm dying of cancer tour, and you want to like reconnect. But I'm having the greatest time. I'm meeting with all of these people from my past
I love it.
and telling them how much they meant to me.
Yes.
I had a guy who was, I called him an inadvertent mentor, a guy who had been a consultant at Children's Hospital that worked at one of the big public affairs firms when I was this burgeoning, unwashed, 26-year-old.
Yeah.
And we had, and I ran into him at a United Club, and I'm like, I would love to grab lunch and catch up.
Yeah.
And so we had lunch or whatever. And I said, I have no agenda, but I would like to tell you that you had a really big impact on my career. And he said, back, goes, really? I said, I like sort of look at you as my unintended mentor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, but I told him his name was John Barron. I'll give him credit. I said, there was an elegance,
Yes.
there was a wisdom, and I was this bouncing off the wall 26-year-old who thought I was funny at everything and some of the inappropriate things I said.
Yeah.
And I said, but I want you to know that you have been a model for that. And he just sat back and he's like, that means the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so now as I'm traveling around, I'm trying to spend an extra day in finding somebody and just connecting.
I think
And-
that's beautiful.
And unlike, like we always say, is like, we're going to stay in touch and blah, blah. Generally, I'll say, we always say stay in touch. We probably won't.
right.
But I just want you to know that you've been really an important person to me.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that.
And I'm actually saying that out loud.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say let's stay in touch because we probably won't.
Yeah.
But let me know if you're in town. But if I don't see you again, I want you to know this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great.
Isn't that fun?
That's awesome.
That's so much
It's
fun.
just I look at it I'm not trying to be an example to anybody.
You're giving
I'm
love.
just- Yeah, and I'm it's the old story of the warm fuzzies and the cold pricklies, right?
Right. Right. I
And
love
I'm,
that
get- I'm
story.
getting so many
Yeah.
I get so much back. It just fills my tank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one of the cool things about sort of this time of life is I'm getting to stay. Like I've traveled, spoken in 28 countries around the world.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sound like a martyr. I've spoken in India like 6 times. I've never seen the Taj Mahal.
Yeah.
I've been to South Africa. I didn't go on safari. I mean, that's not a complaint. My mom died at 69 years old and never owned a passport. But I'm afforded this time
Yes.
to go do a little more. Because I raced home because my
Absolutely, yeah.
kids were in sports. They were in theater. They were in music.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be the dad who missed that stuff. Like my middle daughter played high school basketball. She's 6'1". And her senior year, her junior and senior year, I missed 2 games in 2 years.
Good
I
for
turned
you.
down business
Yeah.
because one of the dads, I mean, all these pithy phrases. One of the dads said to me once, like early on, we were at one of my daughter's softball games, and I had just gotten off a plane. I literally showed up. I'm in a suit and everything else because I wanted to be at the game. And he gives me a fist bump. He goes, "Good job, Dad." And then he said this quote that has stayed with me so much. He says, "Our children take attendance at their events.
Yeah.
You're either there or you're not."
That's a
Right?
great quote.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
They make that shot and they look in the stands
Yep.
like, did Dad see that? Our children take attendance at their events. You're either there or you're not. And that hit me hard.
Yeah.
So I made sure that I was there. I loved every minute. But then again, it's a busy time.
Right.
Yeah.
People say, "So what do you do for fun?" I'm like, what's the F word you're saying? What's that fun? I drive
You're integrating it.
I
With your
drive
work.
my kids to practice and I sit in the stands and there's a part of me that loves the freedom for where we are. And there's a big part of me that misses all that as
Oh,
well.
yeah. Well, you said maybe grandkids someday, so you'll get to do that all over again.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah. It is
We-
fun.
Your calendar is going to get filled up with
Yeah.
spend time with Grandpa Day.
Absolutely. Well, my wife and I, we talk about that. We're like, we cannot wait to have grandkids, but we're like, we can wait,
Yeah.
but we can't wait, but we can wait.
Right.
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 You don't want that bad situation and that
Yeah.
inadvertent, and no, we're not raising your kids,
Yeah.
you know?
Oh, that's so cool.
So, but we can't wait to love up and slobber all over our grandkids someday.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's great. Well, I got one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then I'll turn it over to you. So you've traveled to over 20 countries. What was the exact number?
28 I've spoken in,
28.
34 I've visited.
Okay, that's insane.
And
First of all,
it's a privilege.
Yeah.
Huge privilege.
so I've got to ask you just a fun question.
Yeah.
What was the place you went to that was the biggest culture shock? There's like, okay,
Oh, that's a great question. Everybody always asks what your biggest culture shock was Kuwait.
okay,
Is I've done a number of Arabic countries, and just, I mean, the people are beautiful, the cultures are great. The first time I got off a plane in Dubai, because we're also indoctrinated here in America, and I saw people in full burqa. There's this back of your mind. Everybody's got bombs strapped to their bodies. I mean, it's just so naive.
Sure.
And then within a few days, you realize this is amazing, right? Kuwait was one of those tough places because it was very, very conservative. So most everybody was in full burqa and everything else. So I would go to the mall because it's just one of the things I'll do. And what's interesting was just this. It was just a quiet.
Huh.
There's not a lot of hustle and bustle. So
Huh.
culturally, my client wanted to meet at like this hookah bar. So they're all smoking stuff, but it was very male dominant.
Sure.
It's one of those things that, I get done speaking and you want to shake people's hands and the women take a step back. It's like, oh, that's right. I'm not supposed to, I'm not supposed to touch. And one of the funny things, sort of funny anecdote, is I'm at the mall and, they have normal stores. They have Victoria's Secret.
yeah,
But what was interesting was all you could see in the pictures were just like women's faces, but all you could see were their eyes. So they're like wearing the headscarf, and then you saw these beautiful like green eyes and everything else. And then if you walked in, you couldn't see in the store, but if you walked around the corner, it's normal.
Okay.
And I talked to them, they said, oh no, when we go home, they want to be beautiful, they want to be sexy, they take all this stuff off. They just can't be that for other people. They said,
Okay.
it's all human, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the culture shock was just this, I just worried that I was going to do something wrong or say something wrong. I did one presentation where they were all Arabic, which is all fine. I mean, we all get along great, but there were people standing off to the sides holding submachine guns,
Oh yeah.
and I'm like, I'm not used to that.
wow.
Yeah. When I was in Tel Aviv, it was very much like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but most of that, I'm so fortunate. I mean, everywhere, and we're really spoiled. I mean, English is the international language of business. So almost
yeah.
everywhere I go, it's in
It's
English.
crazy.
But my favorite place in the world is Dubai.
Yeah.
And I've been there twice in the last 3 months.
Wow.
It's like Miami meets Vegas meets,
Really?
and over 75% of the people there were somewhere else.
Okay.
Europeans and everything else. So very small local population.
Huh.
But like, it just, everything is excess. Like the biggest indoor ski area and the tallest building and the biggest water park and the biggest
Really?
mall and the second biggest mall and the second biggest water park. And like, I'm watching in Ski Dubai, which is in the mall. They have an indoor ski place. But I'm sitting in TGI Fridays watching skiers,
Wow.
right? And they're from everywhere. I mean, you like don't
And it's
even-
120 degrees outside, right?
Yeah, well, in certain times of year, absolutely
Yeah.
it is. But I was just there, and I was at that's like what they call the marina,
Yeah.
which is basically just a place they just dig out a trench and,
Yeah.
and build buildings around it. And I'm driving a scooter, and I went out on a yacht for $50 for an hour,
Wow.
just because I had an afternoon off, and I'm gonna go out on a yacht.
I love it.
Wow.
But it's just, and the food, and that's the best part of it. And with an extrovert like me, everywhere I go in the world, and they treat you like royalty. My
Yeah.
kids, I remember they would travel with me when they were younger. I think my son was probably 9, and he's like, "Dad, they think you're famous.
Yeah.
You're just my dad, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, they do think I'm famous." I come home, my wife's like, "Hey, Mr. Big Deal, go take out the trash."
That's awesome. Oh, hey, so we got 2 last things.
Yes,
So one, you've made to the end.
thank
You
you.
were a wonderful guest.
This is a privilege, and John was mentioning this before. what a privilege it is just to break bread
Yeah.
and just have great conversations. So I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And so what we love to do is we've got all these cameras right here.
Yes.
You can talk about anything you want. You can promote yourself as
Have I
long
not talked about everything so far? I mean,
if there is, you get full reign, and then I will ask you the question that we always end on.
okay. I mean, this is one of the things. If you go back and try and whiteboard this conversation, I think I've gone every tangent.
That's what's great.
I hope I've actually answered your questions as well. But
Oh, this is just a roadmap, like you're saying when you go on a speaking tour,
yeah,
right? Right. This is just a roadmap. Everything else is improv. We're just following where the energy goes.
yeah. Is there anything I want to talk about? I no. I think I've talked about everything, and if you want to give me a prompt for something, and then I'm off to the races. But I don't think there's anything that I've covered. I just this is such a privilege. I applaud you guys for this project and embarking on this, not knowing where it's going to go, and just letting the conversations. And there's something really beneficial about saying we're going to have a minor bit of structure,
Right.
but we're going to do this for a long time.
Yeah.
And then you get a lot of content. You know, there's so much that we do in business and life with artificial constraints and time limits,
Exactly.
right?
Yep.
Right.
And
Yep.
so this is a real treat. It's also a real treat to kind of turn off the world, because for this couple hours, if I was in my office, I'd be dealing with 9 different things and 42 different time zones.
Right.
And
Two
so,
rambunctious cats.
yeah, and
Yeah.
2 loving, rambunctious cats, and to turn off the world and focus
Yeah.
on the conversations. Good. I was just had one of those things where I went to another city and I looked up an old friend. It was somebody I used to sing with in my a cappella.
Oh, I
Oh,
love
And
that.
so I
Cool.
had lunch with my friend Dr. Bob and his wife Gretchen, who are dear friends, who I spent much of my 20s with. And we were talking about the same thing about sort of this third act, and
Yeah.
and they said we have a saying, and the saying is choose people. And I said, tell me what that
Absolutely.
means.
Yep.
And they said it means that if somebody calls and say, hey, I'm coming to town, or are you free for lunch, or we're all getting together, it doesn't matter what's on our calendar. We were going to do this. I was going to clean out the summer home. I was
Sure.
going to whatever. And when there's an opportunity, choose people.
Yeah.
And I love that. I told them I'm going to steal that. And they said, because we can certainly fill up our calendar. We can
Yep.
certainly fill up our time. But it's also one of the things that my wife and I talked about, because for so many years, and John, you may relate to this, is that our peer group, our friends, were dictated by the parents of our kids' friends or their teammates.
Mhm.
So the people that when my son was on his football team, we hung out with the parents of the other kids on that team.
Of course. Right.
Right. And so
Yep.
we made a joke, and these were great people.
Yep.
We made a joke that, like, do we get to choose our own friends now? Right. And so one of the things that we want to do in this time, and we are, is that since we become empty nesters the last couple of years, is that we're really prioritizing time with friends.
Yes.
Yep.
And that was so precious.
Yeah.
And if I have any regret, and I do, is that I didn't save enough time. I didn't prioritize time with friends when my kids were growing up, because the obligations are
Yeah.
tremendous. Financial, keeping the house up,
Yeah.
the honey-do list, the practices. It was just constant. And I think about the friends who they go with their buddies and they go to Vegas, or they go ride 4-wheelers and all
Yeah.
those, or golfing.
Right.
And I didn't do enough of that.
Yeah.
And so that's part of where we are right now.
Totally agree.
And so this is a treat, and I appreciate you guys inviting me in and the conversation.
Well, I appreciate you trusting me, because we didn't really know each other all that well.
Yeah, we've
I
met a
mean,
couple of
we-
times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in our prep call for this, you said how many followers or something do you have? And I think I said something like, we have 100 subscribers, you know, right? And then you asked what was our revenue model, and like, we don't have one.
Yeah, and I wasn't trying to vet you. I was just trying to say, what's your purpose of this, so I can serve you.
Oh, believe me,
Right.
I
No,
get it.
But I get that question all the time when I'll try
Right.
and get somebody big deal for my podcast.
Yeah.
And the gatekeeper how many Twitter followers do you have?
Oh,
How many
right,
whatever?
right,
And
right.
I'm like, if that's going to be your criteria,
Yeah.
for me, I just wanted to find out what's your goal for this and how can I support it?
You helped us achieve that goal today.
Good.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so, last thing I'll ask is
Okay, last
the
question.
last question. Actually, it's his question. I just the one who asked.
If I could be any
Right.
kind of a tree, what would I be and why?
Oh, that's a great
No,
question.
it
but
isn't.
That's not.
It's a stupid question. Sorry, go ahead.
So, all of the videos and everything that we take will outlive all of us.
Yeah.
And so, if you were to give that one piece of wisdom, that one piece of advice to like your great, 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 great grandkids, what would be the advice that you'd want to leave for them?
Boy, I'm thinking about all the pithy things that I've said so far that were somebody else's quote. Boy, what a great question. Be good people. Like 100%, that's it. I was trying to think, how do I say that in a, under that umbrella is the do the right thing and all the other kind of things. Just be a good human.
Mhm.
100%. That takes care of almost everything else. It defines the kind of behavior. What's a good person? What would a good person do in any circumstance?
Yeah.
We're all human. Life's hard. I'm helping my kids through their 20s right now, and there's so much angst. And my wife and I talk about that. Just it is harder to be young today. It is harder. I joke about this sometimes on stage, and I say, when you think about how can you imagine being a teenager today and everything, there's such a permanence
Right.
and everything is documented. And I joke and I said, as you know, growing up, let's be honest, we did stuff.
Right.
There is no record of it. Can I get a hallelujah? And everybody gives me a hallelujah, right? We were stupid. We did stupid, but now that stuff carries them. And so how many times when your kids leave and you say, make good choices, right? Because we know what bad choices are. Bad choices get kids drunk driving accidents or do things that hurt other people.
Yeah.
What is a good human? And being a good person, that's 100% what I would say.
It
is
sounds like,
make that your North Star.
from what you said, it sounds like your dad embodied that.
Yeah, my whole family did. My whole family, and they still do. And everybody's a pain in different times, but so what's the North Star? What's the core? What's the core that you come back to? Somebody said something to the effect of like, you know, don't do anything that the old saying was, don't do anything that you wouldn't want to see in the local paper.
Sure.
Or
Right.
or what would your mom think about saying?
Sure,
And-
right.
But it all comes back to the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Is when given a choice, be a good person.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you again. That
Thank
was
you very
wonderful.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is great. This was fun. Let's
All
do it
right.
again next week.
That's the ending I
I was
needed.
gonna say
That's
you're-
the ending I needed.
And that's why I said it. I was about to say the same thing. I said, you're going to end on that.